The BYU basketball program loses their third straight game in Big 12 play in Fort Worth against TCU. Is it officially time to panic for Kevin Young and company? Sure feels like it.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Tough loss for BYU men's basketball. They come up short in a 71-67 loss to TCU on Saturday afternoon in Fort Worth. Second straight week on the road, second straight week they picked up a loss. And you combine that with a loss Tuesday night of a similar variety, a tough loss to Texas Tech. Suddenly, BYU is 1-3 in Big 12 play. And as I said in the open, I think it's officially time, if you're a Cougar fan, to feel a little apprehensive about this BYU basketball team. Right now, they're just not executing. Now, down the stretch in this game, the final minute and 40-ish and change, BYU went scoreless. And you compare that to the 14-1 run that they had in the final minutes of the first half to regain the lead after they were down 10 early on in this. Feels really, really disconcerting about this BYU basketball team. Now, I keep telling myself, and many of you out there are saying the same thing. Well, it's only 4 games in of a 20-game Big 12 schedule, Jake. I get that. But let's be real. BYU has fallen off the pace, and they've fallen off the pace in a big way. Down late, they get a big bucket for TCU to take the lead, and Noah Reynolds, who had a really, really fine game, ended up with 21 points, and I thought it was phenomenal for TCU in this matchup. He makes a tough bucket to give TCU a 2-point lead. BYU comes down the court, and what semblance of offense did they run there? There was really nothing. And I will also say this, in late game scenarios, especially right now with the shot not falling for Jaeger Demon, why is the ball not in Dallin Hall's hands? Why is he not executing the offense? Deferring to a freshman, and I get that Jaeger is the star. He's the centerpiece of the recruiting class. I get all that. But in college basketball, veteran experience counts for a lot. And we all saw last year when BYU needed big buckets late in games, who had the ball in their hands more often than not. It was a guy like Dallin Hall. I did not like the fact that Jaeger Demon panicked in that moment. He got cut off, decided to turn around and heave up a fadeaway 3. And like I said, his shot is not falling right now. Why? Why would you shoot that shot in that circumstance? That's a really, really tough one to stomach. And TCU finishes the game on a 6-0 run and wins the game. And they get back to 500 in Big 12 play. And now BYU is a full 2 games back. And really, really gut-wrenching loss for the Cougars. In fact, BYU, a lot of the metrics out there say that BYU competed very favorably. 35-24 in rebound advantage. BYU outshoots TCU 47.8% to 42.4%. The three-pointers actually dead even, 9 of 24 for both teams. BYU better at the free throw line in this game, 73% as compared to 63%. But when it mattered most, TCU went out, made plays, and gets the W. And that's a key point that I still feel like BYU doesn't have an answer for, is who is the leader of this team. It feels like too often, because Jaeger Demon, once again, is the star freshman, is being deferred to a little bit too much. Now, is that a coaching thing? Is that the players on the court opting for that? But in late game scenarios, I want to see the ball in the hands of BYU's playmakers. And in fact, why was Richie Saunders not having something run for him? 26 points. He bounces back after 2 very rough outings against Houston and against Texas Tech after he had that 30-point outburst against ASU. Goes for 26, 9 of 13 from the field. Why are you not looking for Richie in that scenario? Dallin Hall, for his efforts, had a decent game himself. He had 6 assists. Like, you can't have guys out there that are going to play losing basketball in that circumstance. And I know that sounds really harsh to say about Jaeger Demon right now, but that scenario, he gets cut off and he panics. That's a freshman, and that happens. Freshmen, they don't have the same experience that a guy like Dallin Hall has, who has played a lot more games at the collegiate level. That ball should have been in Dallin Hall's hands, should have been allowing him to have some ball screen action, try and run something for Richie Saunders. It's really, really tough to stomach BYU losing that basketball game, because that's one of those ones that you would look at and say, BYU's got to have that game if they want to get to 500. We had Ken Pomeroy on with DJ and PK on my radio show earlier this week, and the math in his mind for BYU to make the NCAA tournament is he said that BYU needed to go 11-9, maybe 10-10 in conference. Now they're 1-3, so they're falling off the pace, and that's the concern here. Is the BYU could find themselves completely on the outside looking in come this back half of the Big 12 slate when I've been feeling like, okay, they're going to turn a corner at some point, and maybe they will. Maybe they'll go on an absolutely incredible run down the stretch, and I'll be happy to eat my words. But right now, it's absolutely valid to panic about what BYU basketball is doing right now. There doesn't seem to be any semblance of strong leadership from this team. Now, does that go to the coaching? Does that go to the players? That part can be debated till kingdom come. But I look at this and say that in late game scenarios, down 2, that ball should be in Dallin Hall, Richie Saunders' hands, and let them go and make a play for you because they have the experience. Having Jaeger Demon cast up that 3, really, really tough. Same thing with Fousseyni Traore, the possession before that, if I recall correctly, for BYU. He misses a point-blank bunny. Just absolutely can't miss stuff like that. And that's kind of been a hallmark of this BYU team is they get in tough spots and they lose their collective head. And that's a tough thing to watch this BYU team do that because last year, under Mark Pope, this was a team that, by and large, actually had a game plan of how they were going to go about stuff. I just don't see that veteran presence right now for BYU. And once again, it may come around in the back half of the Big 12 slate, but if you absorb too many losses in this first 10 games before you make that proverbial turn on the back half coming up in February, that may just be too little too late, and BYU could be already way out of any semblance of making an NCAA tournament run outside of winning the Big 12 championship. And might I remind you, the last time the BYU won a conference title, 2001. 2001 is the last time BYU won one of their conference titles. It was way back when they were in the Mountain West Conference. And crazily enough, I think that I saw this. I think my good friend Mitch Harper put it out there. First win for TCU over BYU since 1997 when they were both members of the WAC. It's been quite some time. Now, the two didn't play since 2011, if I recall correctly. They did play last year in Provo. Last time they played in Fort Worth was in 2011. I should correct myself there. But the bigger point to be made here is that's a bad loss. There's just no other way to spin it in my mind for this BYU basketball team. Just you cannot have late game breakdowns and be those proverbial chickens running around with your head cut off late in game scenarios. That comes down to coaching. That comes down to veteran presence on the court. All of that needs to be inspected. We're looking at a team that I think we're learning in real time that the hype doesn't match the actual substance with this BYU basketball team. And that's not to say that they can't match it at some point, but they've got to get it turned around very, very quickly for BYU basketball because once again, you're in very, very dangerous territory of falling off a pace to make an NCAA tournament berth. And I think that was like literally the minimum expectation for BYU. Now, Oklahoma State comes to town on Tuesday night. That's a game that BYU on paper, it's a must win. There's zero doubt about it at this point. And then you follow that up on Saturday by making the first trip to Salt Lake as members of the Big 12 Conference. I guess it's not first trip, but they made a trip last year, but as both being members of the conference. Next week, you got to go 2-0. You've got to claw your way back to 3-3 next week. There's just zero doubt about that. Because if you don't, you're suddenly 2-4 or heaven forbid, 1-5 in the conference. Well, yeah, you're going to be the absolute bottom tier of the Big 12, and all of the good feelings, the goodwill that was built up by everything that BYU did in recruiting, all the hoopla around this BYU basketball team could already be gone after next week. That would be really, really tough to stomach. But next week, it's a week that Kevin Young and company has to look at and say, we have to just find a way. It doesn't matter how we get it. We got to go to 2-0. We got to get back to 3-3 and restore some semblance of confidence that this team can be a better basketball team, because Oklahoma State and Utah, they're teams that if you want to be a middle tier team and have a chance to sneak into the NCAA tournament, you got to beat the likes of Oklahoma State and Utah because those are bottom tier teams. But if you lose to them, guess you're joining the bottom tier, those teams. So really, really tough loss for BYU. There's a lot of soul searching to be done after 3 straight losses, but only thing they can do is get back on the court, get back to work, and see what they do Tuesday night against Oklahoma State. All right, I will have more for you guys in the lead up to that OSU matchup on Tuesday. We'll also talk about BYU getting maybe their own version of Travis Hunter. If you didn't see it, 4-star prospect McKay Madsen officially committed to BYU, picking the Cougars over UCLA and Oregon. And I don't feel prepared at this point to really dig into him because I need to go back and look at more of his film to get a feel for him as a player. So we'll talk about more about him on Monday, the full edition of the podcast coming up. It'll be releasing early Monday morning. For those of you watching this on YouTube, it goes out overnight for those on the audio format, wherever you get your podcast. But as always, thank you for all of your support of the podcast. Leave your comments below, share, subscribe, rate, review. Do all the things to help this podcast grow, have a really, really strong start to 2025, 11 days in, but we'd love to see it continue to grow. And obviously some wins from BYU basketball would help that along the way. So we'll see what happens, but a tough loss for BYU basketball as they look now to rebound against Oklahoma State and Utah next week. And the whole mentality's got to be 2-0 next week, no matter how you get it. Ugly, pretty, doesn't matter. Just get the W's and get back to 500 in the week to come. All right, more coming up as the week progresses here on Locked On Cougars. But as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And as always, once again, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.